slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up.
Welcome back, friends. I'm Rogue, and in today's Lord of the Rings Online Beginner Guide, we are going to be taking a look at the Guardian. The Guardian is described as a stalwart defender who utilizes heavy armor and a shield to increase their mitigation and avoidance capabilities. Armed with buffs to keep them in the fight and a variety of taunts to keep the enemy focused on them, the Guardian acts as the primary tank to any fellowship. But before we dive in, I want to say thank you to all the recent and returning subscribers. Thank you guys for being here. Okay, so to play a Guardian, first we must have a hero. All races are applicable to be a Guardian, except for the Beorning, of course, because he is Big Bear mode only. Sorry, big guy.
Oh, bother.
Now that we have a hero, let's talk about what the Guardian receives at first level. Guardian's Ward is a melee offense attack that deals solid main hand damage and increases your parry and block rating for 10 seconds and rests on a speedy cooldown. Sting is another very fast melee strike that deals main hand damage on a quick cooldown. This skill upgrades at level 20 to remove one corruption from your target and should act as your primary spammable attack at low level. At second level, you gain 2 new skills. Retaliation requires a parry response to use, but deals good damage to a single target on a quick cooldown. And Shield Swipe. This attack requires a block response to use, but dishes out 2 attacks from both your main hand weapon and shield, and also sits on a fast cooldown. Now, due to the recent changes in class specializations, you're now able to choose a class line at second level. Usually, I would practice with all 3 before making a choice, but as a Guardian, I think the expectation is to make a tank, so I focused on the blue line. For selecting the blue line, I received 2 additional skills. Shield Taunt, which requires the Shield Swipe skill to use, and taunts up to 4 enemies within 10 meters of the Guardian. I'm going to be honest here, use this skill when and if you can to become comfortable with the mechanic, but at the starting levels, this skill does not see a lot of action due to the requirement. So to Shield Taunt, you must first gain a block response based on your block rating, then you have to Shield Swipe followed by Shield Taunt. Now the formula is fine, it's just that most overland enemies will never survive long enough to see you use the skill. And Litany of Defiance, a buff-debuff skill that increases your tactical and physical mitigation and slows enemy attack speed by 20% for 15 seconds on a lengthy cooldown. Again, Tree of Trust here, this skill just sat on my hotbar, and apart from the one time I used it on a training dummy, it didn't see a lot of use for the beginning Guardian, but I could see its potential against boss encounters later on. Now, before we get too deep into the Guardian skills per level, I want to talk about the class in general for those players looking to make the Guardian tank. At low level, you're just a fighter with a sword and a board. Your ability to hold aggro is almost non-existent for the beginning levels. You are also one of the few classes that as a blue line tank does not have a self-heal. These are big turnoffs for someone looking to be a tank in an MMO. But don't be discouraged by either of these points, and be patient with the Guardian class. This fighter with a sword and a board eventually becomes a wrecking ball of silver steel as you gain levels. For now, set aside the tanking rotation and just focus on leveling. Okay, let's get into it. At 4th level, you gain your first area of attack ability with Sweeping Cut. This frontal arc double slash can hit up to 5 targets and deals your main hand damage twice to anyone unfortunate enough to be standing in front of you. Use this for small group pulling to deal good initial damage to your enemies. At 6th level, you gain Whirling Retaliation, which requires a parry response to use, and acts exactly the same as the level 2 Retaliation skill, except it can hit up to 5 targets in a 5-meter circle around the Guardian. For me, this skill replaced Retaliation altogether. No reason to hit one guy when I can hit 5. At 7th level, you gain access to bows and crossbows, which is nice for pulling enemies, but shouldn't be relied on to bring enemies down. At 8th level, you gain Let Fly to pair with your newfound archery skill. It's fluff on your hotbar unless you're forced to remain in a ranged fight. As always, it's around this level that you should seek out Slayer Deeds to snag up your first virtues. Now, if you're starting in the new zones, you can take on bandits at this location and orcs at this location. Farm these boys to grab up your first virtues, and there are 2 that fit the bill for the low-level Guardian. Zeal, which offers might, physical mastery, and crit rating, as well as minor bonuses to both physical and tactical mastery. This virtue, in my opinion, is the best in-slot virtue for the Guardian due to might being the primary stat for the Guardian class, followed closely by loyalty, which grants vitality, armor value, incoming healing rating, and minor bonuses to your maximum morale or hit points. Now, I know that Zeal is a DPS virtue, and as a tank, you should traditionally focus on gathering as many hit points as possible, but in Lotro, Might offers the Guardian the greatest bonuses to his defenses and also increases his damage output, and a tank that can't deal damage can't hold aggro. At 10th level, you gain Vexing Blow, another area of effect melee strike that deals good damage and can hit up to 5 targets and sits on another speedy cooldown. It's here that we have the starting combat rotation, not for tanking, mind you, but for taking on larger enemy groups and sending the bad guys back to the shadow as quickly as possible. Vexing Blow should be your starter move, followed by Sweeping Cut, Guardian's Ward, and sprinkle in Whirling Retaliation when or if it procs. You can finish off stragglers with Sting or another Guardian's Ward. I know that this isn't much of a rotation for the 10th level Guardian, but you'll be surprised how many enemies can't hang with this simple formula. Now, as I mentioned earlier, as a Guardian you don't have any healing skills, but what you do have is very fast cooldowns and access to 2 very strong area of attack maneuvers. Become comfortable with angling your enemies so that your area of attacks land, and then you can play cleanup with Sting and Guardian's Ward, which both have insanely fast cooldowns. Before we move on, it is always a good idea to have some healing consumables on you in case you find yourself in a pickle. Okay, let's move on. At 14th level, you gain Charge, a self buff that increases your run speed by 50% on a 10-second cooldown and grants immunity to slowing effects for the duration and sits on a 1-minute cooldown. Definitely not the coolest charge move I've seen in MMOs, but if you happen to step in some gum, I suppose the skill could come in handy. At 16th level, you gain Challenge, finally a clickable taunt that can hit up to 7 targets in a 7-meter radius, but it does have a lengthy cooldown. If you happen to be playing with a spirited DPSer, keep this bad boy in reserve for when the DPSer realizes that bad guys do damage. Ignore the Pain is an 18th level ability that removes 1 poison, disease, fear, or wound. This skill is good for keeping the enemies from turning you into a Skyrim guard, and sits on a speedy cooldown, allowing you to stay in the fight without fear of being crippled by bleeds or STDs. And finally, at 20th level, your Sting ability upgrades to improve Sting, removing a corruption from your target. And Turn the Tables, which shakes up Daze's stuns, recovers from being knocked prone, and dishes out a little payback to the guy who made you that way. Let's talk about speccing out the blue line for the purpose of tanking. I started with Relentless Assault, which offers your Sting ability up to a 25% chance to provide a block and parry response with 5 points spent. This will increase your chances of gaining a block or parry response without having to rely solely on the block and parry percentages. From here, I selected Guardian's Pledge. This is a 1-point trait that offers a 20% bonus to evade, parry, and block chance for 15 seconds, but does sit on a 3-minute cooldown. This should serve as an oh shit button for when you need a block or parry response right now, or a moment to swig a potion. Then I move back to Defensive Expertise. This adds up to an additional 5% block chance at 5 points spent, and is just another way to keep your shield out in front of you. From here, grab Bellow, which not only increases the range of your challenge ability, but also reduces its cooldown to 30 seconds at 5 points spent, so that you can maintain aggro. Before we call it good, let's talk about a tanking rotation for when you find yourself looking to run group content. As with most tanks, your job is to gather up all the minions and keep them locked onto you. Lead with Challenge to grab up 7 enemies, pop Guardian's Pledge to increase your block response chance, and Guardian's Ward to increase your mitigation. If you don't get a block response because the RNG gods hate you, drop a Sting to increase your chances and shield taunt as soon as you can. Use your shield rotation, which is shield swipe, shield taunt, and shield smash to maintain aggro. If DPS starts to pull aggro, reserve Challenge to pull them back to you. This is not a perfect tanking rotation, and if you've ever tanked in an MMO before, you know that you will sometimes be forced to mix up your rotation to keep your healer and DPS out of the fire. That being said, hey DPS, I'd like to talk to you over here for just a second. The tank's role is to ensure that the fights go smoothly, so that you can use all your fancy moves to send the bad guy home with his ball. Be patient with your tanks, guys. They're the forefront of the fellowship and the guy getting slugged so that at the end of the day we can all go home with a win. The Guardian is a tough nut to crack, not only in your defensive abilities, but also following the steps to hold aggro as you gain levels and begin to lead the charge in group instances. For me, I really enjoyed leveling the Guardian and smashing things in the face with a shield. If you're looking to hold the line and stand strong against the shadow, the Guardian will not disappoint you. If you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for your time. If you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like to taunt the algorithm and consider subscribing to join the Fellowship of Nerd Shit. And have an amazing adventure. Goodbye. Beedly-dee-da-doo-dum-da-diddle-dum, making my way down the road. What the hell is happening? What the fuck is this? Was Tolkien's Road? What is this? Let's try it the other way. Diddly-dum-dum. Oh, Oh my god, no, no. Absolutely fantastic.